Okay, so welcome everyone to Rethinking Systems, a new lens for policy and investment. So it's really great that you can all be here and take the time. So thank you for that. I'm Natalie Lawrence. I'm the communications manager at the DT Lab. So we are, oh, my screen is not letting me, there we go. We are really excited to host this event with TIPC, our sister project, and bring together such a diverse crowd of people. So we've got a really great range of backgrounds in the room, and this is an online space for learning and for networking. So we value all contributions, and if you do want to make a contribution, if you can just pop it in the chat, any questions, reflections, and thoughts about what you're hearing. So this event is the first in a series. We're going to hold a few of these to explore all the tools in the new DT Learning Hub. So on to today's plan for today. In today's session, we're going to explore the Pentagonal map tool. So to kick us off, Johan Scott, director of the DT Lab and founder of the DT Lab and TIPC, is going to introduce us to the key principles of socio-technical systems thinking. Then we have two case examples. Anna Pally will start, who is head of technology, watch office and quality assurance for IRTA. Then we'll move over to Richard Azania, who is co-founder of the Good Investors. Then Diana Velasco, the Deputy Director of the DT Lab, is going to reflect on both of the two case examples. Lastly, Vicky Shaw, the Programme Director of TIPC, is going to introduce us to the tool and take us through. And then we're going to have time for a Q&A at the end. So that's the lineup and that's the plan for today. We have only got an hour, so I will be keeping an eye on the time. And yes, so I will hand over to Johan Scott now.
Hello, everyone. Very nice. So many of you are participating in this event, where we will talk about indeed system change, but specifically about one of the tools we have to discuss system change. Well, the first question is, of course, why do we need system change? The reason is that the world is facing this poly crisis, and I do not want to elaborate on this now, but the point is that these various crises like the biodiversity loss and climate change and inequality and poverty, they are all connected and they are tied to the systems we use for the provisioning of basic needs. So in order to deal and confront these challenges, we really need system change. Next slide. And this slide shows this, because on the one axis you see, well, impact or meeting the sustainable development goals or whatever measure we use for impact, and the other slide, we see that other axis, we see the timeline. And you can see that system change takes 10 years before it crosses the system optimization line. So system optimization is something like precision agriculture, where you use less pesticides, while system change is regenerative agriculture, a new type of agriculture. So to introduce that and to become effective in terms of impact, measurable material impacts, it takes 10 years, but it goes much further. So to address the challenges, we really need to move to system change. Well, we do have to acknowledge that system optimization and an in-between category system redesign is also necessary. So in fact, we need all three, and policy making and investment is often about stretching. So trying to make system optimization moving towards system change, or making sure that system change doesn't fall back too much to system optimization. Next slide. So when we talk systems, it's important what we mean by it, because many actors and organizations nowadays talk about system change. In fact, it has become a buzzword, but it's often unclear what actors mean by it. So in our work in TIPC and in the deep transition work, we mean socio-technical systems. So socio-technical means that we say that social change and technological change go hand in hand. They go together. So we don't believe in this narrative where we put them at opposite end. It's either technological change or social change. No, it's both. When we look at system change, we look at 5 dimensions of a system. So think about a food system or an energy system. So there are policies in place to support the system. There is an industry delivering, supplying with specific strategies and business models. There are markets and consumers with preferences for a certain type of delivery, and there are technological and scientific options. And finally, there's often a kind of perception and culture around the system that this is what we want and this is what we desire and long for. So, for example, the energy system is built around centralized energy production. And we have seen in Spain some of the consequences of this in terms of blackouts, because everything is connected, basically, and people expect in such a system the state to provide the energy always on any circumstance. So the systems, we call these 5 dimensions the elements of the system components, but they are expressions of underlying institutions or rules. So rules are assumptions about how the world works and how, for example, there are rules about the type of policies that should be in place, what users should do, what type of technological options we should stimulate and subsidize, what type of business models we should use. And these rules drive, in a way, the system development. And the rules guide the behavior by actors. We call them regime actors because they follow these rules. And they are often informal, they are assumptions. And therefore, in transition work, we really need to unpack these rules and assumptions and to open them up for change. So at least let people reflect on it. And therefore, a lot of our work is about learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. So Anna, we'll move over to you to introduce your the first case example. Yes.
First of all, thank you for inviting me to participate in this learning session. I'm going to illustrate how do we use the tool in the frame of transformative innovation initiatives in Catalonia within RIS3CAT, and precisely regarding food systems. First of all, I would like to, whoops, see if it moves. It doesn't seem to change. Oops.
You could try clicking, if you click onto the screen, Anna,
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to highlight the fact that perhaps unlikely in other fields, as Johan said, in the food sector, and especially since 2021 with the Food System Summit, there is an increasingly shared narrative about the need for systemic transformation of these socio-technical systems and the importance of incorporating this complexity-based approach. Okay, I mean, there is maybe this risk of buzzwording, but there is also a broad understanding that this transformation or these challenges that we have to face regarding food systems, they have to be place-based. They need the solutions to be developed with an active participation of local stakeholders. But however, these concepts are much easier to articulate and to implement, especially when diverse actors with very different profiles like farmers, scientists, policymakers, investors, they have to be involved and work together. So I think to understand why we use these Pentagonal maps or how we use it, you need to understand what kind of audience or what kind of actors do we have to interact with. These participants are not experts in systems thinking or transformative innovation, Most of them are very directly affected and connected to the challenges discussed, but their views are often quite partial and very influenced by their specific roles or their pains within the systems. So we use the Pentagonal tool to facilitate new types of conversations and discussions amongst these actors. And also we try to use this as a way to reduce the excessive polarization that very often we find. This helps the participant to move from narrow perspective and mental lock-ins, this idea of stretching or just improving what they know and what they believe is the way to do things. And it definitely helps us to create these shared narratives about this future desired state of the systems. We really don't use the Pentagonal maybe in a very strict way of identifying rules, actors, or resources, but rather we use it as a heuristic tool for systems explorations that helps us to understand this concept of socio-technical systems related to the precise challenges that we are facing and to define these aspirational visions in the future. We generally do this exercise in two phases. We identify enablers and obstacles, and we map these enablers and obstacles across these 5 dimensions of the Pentagon. And then we use this information to design actions on how to remove the obstacles or how to strengthen this enabler, combining some other tools and models, such as this problem framing wheel or these pathway definitions with the two-loop model, etc. So we make different kind of combinations in order to provoke this dialogue among the actors. What we have seen is that this pentagonal mapping really supports this more strategic thinking when facing or when trying to address the problems at the local level, and to help this most systemic change to be envisioned. This structure really opens these rich discussions, and there is no need of much theoretical or expert knowledge about the whole concept, which is really very important, especially in these very starting points. We are trying to create this, let's say, more intuitive integration into these processes. We use this, as I said, we use this to facilitate spaces when we address these initiatives with people on the territory that want to address this, collectively address these complex challenges. We use it to analyze challenges from these different perspectives and trying to see this more systemic vision of the problem. We use it also to question these dominant visions and practices and beliefs and mindsets about the problem, and to translate that into the territory, and also, as I said, to identify those possible interventions or initiatives that should collectively address in order to try to change things and move towards this desired vision of the future. We have an example about agroforestry, how to create this resilient landscape in a Pyrenees region in Catalonia. We use this Pentagon in order to first create this shared vision of the future that we would like to achieve for this region, with the participation of many different actors on the territory, farmers, policymakers, administration, scientists. So we really gather these people most of the times on the territory. I mean, we do these boot camps where changes are expected to happen, and we identified what kind of initiative we should try to spark. We also use this two-folded approach of obstacles and opportunities or facilitating factors when we have already identified or characterized the problems. Sometimes we first try to understand what kind of problems are we addressing, and then use the Pentagon in order to try to, let's say, have a more specific understanding of that problem and what's happening and who should intervene in order to start to move things on the right direction. Most recently, we have used it in a kind of a different initiative. This one was a facilitated initiative to define collective action plan to create a coalition of a network of leading labs to act locally from a place-based perspective towards this climate change that are affecting agriculture. So this was a very different, a different initiative, but in this case, again, we use it as a starting point for a conversation and then to end up creating this action plan for pilot initiatives. And sometimes we use it in other applications as an icebreaker, or as I said before, to explore these possible transition pathways towards the desired vision. In this case, using how useful this map of systems dynamics could be in order to revitalization and resilience for rural areas. So you see, we have really many different ways to combine and to use the tool. This proves to be really very efficient, very straightforward in order to present that to that very diverse kind of audience that we have. And I like this picture just to illustrate that for us, as I said, is a starting point and really a very powerful gateway in order to move people towards this understanding of the problem and towards the desired vision of the future. That would be my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. That was really great. We can already see some questions coming up in the chat, so I'll use those for later on in the Q&A. I want to hand over now to Richard Azania, co-founder of The Good Investors.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks. So thanks a lot. And I will start by saying that in all honesty and sincerity, it was fascinating because your use of well, we call it the pentagram internally. We like that power that we can attribute to systems by calling it the pentagram. But it's very, very different from ours. And so much more upstream, much more around alignment. And for us, it's a bit more mechanistic, and I'll go into it. So just a word about this, because so people understand why and how, the why and the how of the use of the pentagram here. So we're a collective of families focused, of course, on systems investing with the framework, the broad framework that Johan highlighted. And thanks to actually a lot of work with DT Labs, we've come up with a much more structured process than we used to have, very much focused on investing, but with space allowed, and you'll see, for things that aren't part of traditional investing along the lines of ecosystemic intervention, orchestrations, field building, etc. So that's the who. Now, how do we use systems? Voila. Oops, sorry. So first, a quick word about our overall sort of investment selection or investment, our process to investing. We have and these steps are all subdivided into a number of sub-steps that you'll see in a minute, and how the pentagrams of the Pentagonal map fits within this. So the first step is we define the target universe, as mentioned here. It's about understanding the desirable world, seeing, and sorry, I should mention the 4 systems within which we work. It's water, food, biodiversity, and energy, all highly related and focusing on sort of man's basic natural food, water, and biodiversity. Obviously, and is that ship has sailed, we're not going to live without energy. So I think that is a must as well. So within the context of those 4 systems, we define the target investment universe, one system at a time. We then, the classic work around what's the desirable world, how does that translate into that system? And then you'll see how we break that down along the Pentagonal map. Once we have our system, our pathways, and the features we're trying to achieve and the niches we want to see emerge, then we look at investment opportunities in that light, looking at how systemic and catalytic they are and how well they fit within the pathways that have been defined in step 1. Then steps 3 and 4 are where I think we also go well beyond what a classic investor would do, where once we've defined the work that, or the quality, let's say, of a given investment opportunity, we then have to look at the gaps, the things that they cannot fulfill. And then we ask ourselves, 3 and 4, can we build some additional portfolio elements around it, investable opportunities that, let's say, will improve the supply chain, that maybe will accelerate distribution or broaden the market. And if it's not possible from an investment perspective, we call in step 4 ecosystemic interventions, where we become more stakeholder engagement orientated, we become orchestration orientated, etc. So that's the broad sort of approach. What is the investable universe? What are the pathways? An opportunity address those in the areas and in the ways that they cannot address them. Where can we come in, either by adding complementary investments or non-investment activities support them and the niche in which they operate. So now what I'll do here is very quickly break, as you see, the steps have sub-steps. So you have the same 1, 2, 3, and 4. Above them, you'll see the steps for each step that do not require the pentagonal map. All of this is, of course, interrelated. They don't specifically involve the pentagonal map. Doesn't mean that they're not related or conceptually affected by the pentagonal mapping. And then beneath each of the 4 steps, I've outlined the key areas in bigger and bolder, where we use the pentagonal map, and I'll walk you through it. And one thing to remember is, I defined these steps in the previous page as, investment universe, etc. And here what I've done underneath them is to identify from a pentagonal map perspective what the broad purpose is. So in step 1, we really create the baseline of the vulnerabilities of the system and what the desirable world at the system and subsystem level look like. In step 2, we really measure how a given investment can or is supposed to advance some of those features that we'd like to see emerge in the desirable world. And by the way, to answer one of the questions that emerged, we tend to call them features rather than rules. It's a bit less deterministic as well, but I'm sure that'll be a question we'll discuss. And then last, and of course not least, how do these features of any system or subsystem, how do they translate into activities, objectives, outputs of given investment opportunities, investment companies? And is the company then in a position to fulfill those requirements, or do we need to intervene again, either through investing or through non-investment activities? So that's the overview. Now, specifically, the way we approach it at the baseline creation in step 1 is define. Generally, in every case, we limit ourselves to 15 features. So for each of the nodes on the Pentagon, we will limit ourselves to 3 key features max. It doesn't have to be 1, but 3 max, because from a purely sort of a practical perspective. These features are derived from specific, again, same 15 max feature perspective for each of the subsystems. I'll give you an example. In food, for instance, we've defined 3 key subsystems around regenerative agriculture, around waste, and around shift in diets, mostly change in production of protein. And so we would build those, and then we'll aggregate them up to the system level. And then we also do system map that allows us to see if the companies in which we seek to invest not only can fulfill the objectives of the desirable world, but also do they address the vulnerabilities and thus are more capable of helping the niche emerge. Then at the systemic and catalytic analysis, we basically use in very short these features. Broadly, how many of these features are affected? What proportion of the features? How many at the subsystem level, how many at the system level, and what additionality is created along these in order to simply assess. It's not mathematical, it's qualitative, but it's like a 1, 2, 3 rating. So it allows us to be able to rate each potential opportunity and then compare them across systems and across time and so on and so forth, because they have They have a number that we attribute to the qualities that they're and the proportion and the number of features that they affect. And the gap analysis is simply taking the feature, saying, what does that mean in operational terms for a company? So if it's a policy and governance issue, well, they need to get approval for a product. Then at that level, can they do it? If they can't, how can we come in and help? Again, through investing or non-investing, very simply put. And then last but not least, additional developments around where we can use this pentagonal mapping. So we'll have annual updates that are planned in to see if any changes have occurred or our perception has changed. And of course, for new systems ongoing, we're still developing all of our systems maps and so forth. We have 2 more left. We've done water and food, and we're working on energy and biodiversity this year. And then last and certainly not least, the very complex question to systems change. We think that this can be a good starting point rather than some of these harebrained sort of KPIs that people come up with, or very complex ways of measuring things is and that's something we'll evaluate in the coming months, is to use these pentagonal features to say, look, what are the evolutions at the subsystem level, which allows us to see how much progress our portfolio has created through the complementary investments, but also the non-investment activities, and how broadly is the niche progressing along these lines, because a subsystem broadly be associated to niche, perhaps not very precisely, or a number of niches, but it's a good way of isolating that, we feel, and we're planning on exploring these possibilities. Yeah, and that's it for me.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Richard. That was great. So yeah, a lot to think about. I'm going to hand over to Diana for a couple of minutes for some reflections on both of those 2 case examples.
Thank you, Natalie. Fascinating to see the use of the Pentagon in such different cases. I'll just make some few comments on common features that I saw through the examples. Well, in both cases, the Pentagon and pentagram, I really love this way of putting the Pentagon, Richard. It's helpful to prompt systems thinking. It provides a simple yet effective entry point to reflect on multiple dimensions and the complexity of systems. What I see is that even though it's visually simple, in both cases we saw examples, it also supports processes of complex understanding. It helps in both cases to encourage users to consider both current realities of what happens in the investment universe in the case of the good investors, and challenges in the case of Catalonia, but also future possibilities in a structured and multidimensional way. And it helps also to create and to open different perspectives and narratives and share the systemic visions, also questioning dominant perspectives, as Anna showed in the examples. It's used also as a descriptive and a prescriptive tool, more kind of in first understanding, as in the good investors case, with the targeting universe to define what are the entry points or system elements that are there for the investments and the challenges, for example, in the rural areas in Catalonia, but also prescriptive in terms of setting pathways for strategic action. Also creating aspirational visions and identifying enablers and obstacles, as Anna explained. In the case of the good investors, we saw how the Pentagon helped and aided the prospective investments, contributing to desirable worlds, setting pathways, and importantly, helping to identify the leverage points related to the vulnerability of the systems, also helping to determine types of capital. In the case of Catalonia, I see that it creates and facilitates coalition building, and it opens up new types of conversations. So it helps identify actors, potential alliances, and resources needed for collective action and system transformation, enhancing also a strategic focus, guiding toward direct and indirect dimensions of influence and helping to prioritize efforts and interventions. As Anna said as well, moving from a narrow perspective and then help creating new narratives. Lastly, in terms of decision making and investment planning, in both cases, the Pentagon has helped to implement or to evaluate where investments and action points in terms of strategy and policy are needed, and where you can be most impactful, where you should act with your strategies and your area of influence. How to create and explore transition pathways to revitalize rural areas, for example, and in the case of the good investors, to perform systemic analysis in terms of a proportion of systems vulnerabilities targeted, the scope, depth, and relevance of systems features, and how those are addressed through prospective investments. So in both cases, the Pentagon and Pentagram, or Pentagram has been instrumental and used in a strategic way to shape and implement the strategic actions, also used and prospectively used to help the evaluation and monitoring actions for policy and for investment.
Thank you so much, Jana. Those were some really useful reflections, looking at the differences and similarities between both those cases and how they use the Pentagonal map. So Vicky Shaw, I want to hand over to you now to go through how you actually use the tool. So yeah, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. And thanks to our contributors. It's really exciting to see the different ways that you've interpreted this tool. I'll just spend a few moments for people who are new to the tool to think, okay, how would I actually go about using this, and walk through the process. As with all the tools in the Resource Lab or Learning Hub, we expect there's no right way of doing it. You know, we expect it to be adapted to the context and used in different ways and reinterpreted. And as Anna really importantly picked up on, I think the process is often more important than the output in many ways. So I wanted to thank lots of people who've been involved in the development of this tool, but particularly Biposhi Ghosh, who's very involved in the first iteration, and the network of coaches and our members who've shared how they've used these tools, because that really helps to develop them further. Okay, so we're thinking about why we map the system regime, and Johan touched a little bit on that at the beginning. So we're trying to work out how are needs being met within the system. And I find this interesting because I noticed this within not just socio-technical systems, but within organizational systems or family systems. People are trying to get their needs met in some way. And the regime concept articulates how things get done in that system. So the unsustainable regime is often very deeply entrenched, and the transformation requires changing that. And the reason we do that with the Pentagonal map through the Resource Lab methodology is that we're trying to then work through the lens of the multi-level perspective. So we want to import our regime into this particular lens so we can think about what landscape pressures are challenging that regime and which new niches of emerging practice are popping up and helping us to transition to a new socio-technical system regime. So the first step in the process is to think about what it is that we're mapping. And the lab methodology talks about putting the system at the heart, but in actual fact, some of our members are really thinking about putting the challenge at the heart, because the challenge is rooted in a particular system. So there's different ways of interpreting this, but you're starting with something. And I mean, we feel maybe we don't need to get too bound up in where the boundary of that system lies. What's going to be useful for the next step of what you want to do with this. I mean, I would say to start there, but we can come back to this later. So you're mapping across 5 different system dimensions with this tool, and we would encourage users to start perhaps by thinking about what dimensions we belong to ourselves, because this helps us to surface what part we play in the system that we're trying to change. So the next step is to think about actors in the system, and the actors all play a part in keeping this normal system running. So they might include people, organizations, or movements, and the dimensions can be quite helpful because they can trigger thinking about who those actors are. Now, ideally, you would have lots of these actors involved in the mapping of your system. But if that's not possible, then there may be other creative approaches that you can employ to still bring some voice or substance to the actors in the system. The next step after that is to think about materials, and these are the resources, there may be technologies, infrastructures, capital that actors own or consume or distribute, and they're using them to keep the system running, and they may span multiple actors. So some of these are visible, as I've mentioned, but some of these are invisible, like power or trust. And so an important part of this process is to surface those more intangible materials and resources. And we would encourage users to link the actors and materials using the map and maybe look at the strength of the relationship between them. The next step is think about rules, and we had a couple of questions on this. So the actors in this system are following rules, and they're not only laws or regulations, they're values, norms, and habits, and many of these we follow without even thinking about them. But together, these rules synchronize our behavior in the system, and they create patterns in the system. They create formal and informal routines. So, for example, in the UK food system, formally, manufacturers provide expiry dates. But informally, consumers might throw out the food close to the expiry date, even if it's edible. So it's an example of how formal and informal rules can be really quite different. In health, we might have formal referral pathways about which practitioner is seen in which order, but who we defer to might be informal. So again, we can use the map to surface the connections between the rules and the strength of those rules. And then finally, the completed map illustrates what we might call a regime. So that alignment between the actors and materials and the rules that make the system stable. And it helps us to reflect on how this aligns with principles of sustainability or inclusion and how we're meeting those basic needs within that regime. And importantly, and I hope we can come back with another session on the multi-level theory of change, because these tools work very nicely together, because it's a great starting point then to explore the landscape developments, the external factors affecting that regime, and the niches that are popping up as well. So if you'd like to use this, you can copy the Miro board in the Resource Lab and the Learning Hub. We have investor version or a policy funder practitioner version, and we will be putting in some printable PDFs as well that I think are really good to use for face-to-face. And we would love to hear what you're doing with this and hear your comments in the Resource Lab or share your examples of use. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Vicky. So yeah, we have our Q&A time now. We have about 18 minutes, so we do have some time. We do have a very large group, so we're going to take questions through the chat. So yeah, if you can pop any of those questions, as you have been doing, into the chat, and we'll go through chronologically and see how many we can get through. We do already have quite a lot of questions, which is great, but I am going to ask if answers can be short, just a few minutes, so that we can get round to as many questions as possible. So first off, so Vicky did address rules and what we mean by rules. So I will move on to David. I think it was your next question. So when creating a vision using the Pentagonal map, how do you ensure people are acting in good faith? I imagine an informed actor could propose a future rule which benefits them more than others. But given the abstraction of the approach, such a move may not be obvious to the others. So I'd quite like to direct this towards Diana. She's our experiment lead at the DT Lab. But if there's any one of our speakers, Johan, Vicky, Richard, or Anna, who would like to answer, please do.
I was replying in the chat that question. So nice to yeah, nice to see you, David, here. Well, my go-to to this question is that the Pentagon is used as a tool in workshops to basically open up conversations, meaningful conversations between participants, and it helps people to get out of their kind of view that can be narrowed by the area that they move in the system, and helps to look at the complexity of thinking of change in different dimensions. In strategic decisions, perhaps, I mean, I would say that it's used in an iterative way. And the good thing of the framework is that it's very normative in terms of that the changes, if you want to use the Pentagon for future decisions and strategic decisions, should be guided by sustainability and justice. And in that sense, well, it's normative in that way and in that and positive. But as I said, in workshops, that is how it's been used in the case of Catalonia, and for discussions in the case of the good investors, it helps to open up conversations. It's not per se that the Pentagon defines itself the strategy.
Thank you. Perfect. So next question. To what extent do you have all decision levels involved in the discussion, or are the higher decision levels absent when you come together? I ask for the presence of multi-level governance perspective. So Anna, perhaps it might be nice if you could take this one.
Well, the way we do that as in the frame of this transformative innovation policy that we are promoting in Catalonia. So somehow the policymakers and the government is behind this initiative as well. And we find it that it's really useful to bring representatives in these processes, because most of the time we are addressing problems that have been for a very long time present in the territory, that are worrying actors, but also worrying policymakers and representatives. So it's not difficult to bring them in. And what I find very interesting of this process is that what comes up is somehow there's a legitimacy in what then we propose to the administration, because it's not just a partial view from, I don't know, producers or industry or NGOs, whatever, but on the contrary, it's a more complete vision and understanding of the problem that I think policymakers find quite useful in order to integrate into their strategies. So it comes, let's say, quite naturally because of the fact that they are involved in promoting this kind of initiatives. They are trying to really foster this kind of participative processes. And then what comes out of these processes is somehow more plural and more easy to handle from, I think, from a policymaker's perspective.
Perfect. Thank you, Anna. So I'm going to jump to an investment question. So do you look at investment strategies in a range of possible plausible futures based on the understanding that future is not reliably predictable? Richard, if you could take that question, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. First of all, we can predict the future, but we'll keep that to ourselves. No, of course you can't predict the future, and that's why there's a return on investment, right? That's the risk you take. That's the sort of the image you project forward. I think the two things where the Pentagonal map is useful. First of all, it allows you to frame the future intelligently. I think a lot of the answers here were about that, right? It objectivizes as much as makes sure you didn't miss anything along the way. Make sure that various angles were taken into account to the extent, again, possible. So it helps build an explicitly more reliable vision of the future. That's one. And the second thing I think is that that I referred to in what I presented earlier is you need to update this constantly, right? A technology, a regulatory change, a blind spot, all of these can emerge. So and systems are by definition dynamic. So it's not a one-off and you sail off in the sunset and apply it for 20 years. I think there's a whole process whereby you have to update it. So I think between that, the fact that you can really frame things as intelligently, as knowingly, as completely as possible, and some form of a process that allows you to update is much, much better than what I would venture to say most tools used by non-systems investors, just the investment universe at large, and financial asset managers in terms of how they make their decisions. So I think it's a great uplift, regardless of whether you do systems or not.
Great answer. Thank you. So next question. I've seen this a couple of times in the chat, or versions of this, so I think it's good to address. What are the strengths and weaknesses of using the Pentagonal map to describe current and preferred future situations compared to other systems tools and other methods outside systems thinking lineage? Johan, this might be a nice question for you to answer.
I think the advantage is that it's systematic. So it looks at the whole set of dimensions and the relationship across these dimensions. And secondly, it is rooted in academic theory. So a lot of the things we bring to the table have been studied historically and are, well, deeply rooted in academic work. While many other tools I've seen, I would say, are less systematic and are have not been researched by academics.
Thank you, Johan. So Richard, another question for you. Based on the systems that you have already developed in the Pentagonal map 4, can you give a few examples of how investment priorities have changed?
Well, the first and maybe the biggest way in which investment priorities have changed is, as I said, with the DT Labs experiment we ran together, building a much more structured and explicit process compared to what we had, which was more intuitive and implicit. In and of itself, when we've reviewed some of our portfolios in light of this process, certainly there's some of those investments we wouldn't make today with disposal. I think so that again, back to what I said about the quality, not just of the Pentagonal element, but of the whole the theory as you explained it, which is rooted in, again, it's not truth with a capital T, but rooted in some structure and some sort of academic thinking, in and of itself super helpful. Then the answer maybe is we need a little more time, a little more distance from our investments, a little more use of these tools to be able to really give it some sort of give it a time-linked outlook. Started applying it. The only thing where I have a bit of time and space between us and the investment are the ones that we wouldn't make today, given what we know. And I suspect that in the future, like all profits, this tool is sort of back to the issue of envisioning or imagining the future, understanding the future. It's a prophetic tool. So some of what nobody will see, in other words, the investment mistakes we'll avoid, we'll never see. And I think that's one aspect that I expect. But we will also see, hopefully through the monitoring and other elements, how this has helped us not just make the right investments, but also support the right investments over time. So I think support our investments in the right way over time. So again, it's a bit of a projection, but that's where I anticipate the really positive outcomes to me.
Thank you. So we have 5 minutes left, so probably time for 2 more questions. So there's a question here. How do you handle aspects of breaks in the present regime in this Pentagonal map, as most present institutions, politics, power centers might have good reasons to hinder or to undermine deeper desirable changes? I'd quite like Anna to address this from her point of view with her case example.
Don't know if I quite understood the question. How we, can you repeat, please?
I think what I'm getting from it is that institutions, politics, power centers have good reasons to hinder or to undermine deeper desirable changes. So how do you handle that when you're planning and looking at the regime? How do you handle that or factor that into your pathway, into your planning?
To be honest, I would say that most of the time, the kind of people that shows up, I think it's really committed to change things and to better understand the problem. Maybe more than, let's say, ill reasons to hinder information. Sometimes what we find is that a lot of people come from a very narrow vision or siloed, or they are convinced that technology is going to be the solution or a new business model is going to change everything. And what you find is that when you share the vision and you really start from this more holistic understanding of the problem, they are more willing to also just change their own beliefs. So sometimes I think the visions that you can think maybe they're hiding bad intentions, it's a lack of understanding. For example, as I said before, that technology is not going to solve everything. We had this session about living labs, and of course you would expect a lot of people showcasing their so-called solutions, and introducing this different perspective. It makes very clear that it's not going to be enough, that you will have to also understand, I don't know, behaviors and what kind of regulation is operating. So to me, sometimes it's a way of really learning about the problem and understanding better, and seeing how your solution, your perspective, your part of the role is going to really be part of the solution. But probably because the people that really shows up, I think, are really wanting to solve this problem, also because they are owners of the problem. I think what we do on the territory is that we really listen to people that are worried about something that they don't know how to fix. And so probably this is a part of the reason why I don't see those bad intentions or this intentionality behind that. I don't know if that's a good answer, but in our case, I would say that it's probably part of the explanation why we don't see that.
Yeah, well, I did ask you to answer from your perspective and from your experiment. So brilliant, thank you. And last question, we've got just 2 minutes. Diana, this is for you. From an evaluation point of view, do you measure the quality of the process involved, e.g. developing the Pentagonal map? And if you could think about this from both the case examples, so for the investment side and the policy side, a bit of a challenge, as I just said a couple of minutes.
Yeah, and that one is related to another question made by Karen that it's also in the chat. Basically, as Johan said, most of the systems, or what implies changing the systems, is that we together change our mindsets, that therefore learning is fundamental. It's a core element in the transition process. And how to evaluate and how to monitor and track the learning process is difficult indeed. We have some resources that we've created, and I think that Vicky shared a link to the reflective pinnacle that is intended to keep kind of a track of the journey, follow along the process in the experimentation process. For example, in the workshops, Anna showed many different ways of using the Pentagonal map, but many other tools. We focus today in that one. But during these innovation camps, there are ways of kind of recording and keep track of all of the learnings, discussions, reflections, blogs. We do that in the, and I invite everybody to use the TIP resource lab with the case studies, with reflections along the way. So these are ways of doing it. And then we have more precise monitoring, evaluation, and learning related to both pathways and theories of change with specific metrics. But that is another level.
Thank you. So we've reached time. Sorry, I definitely didn't get around to answering all of the questions, but I can see in the chat that our speakers have been answering where they can, so that's great. I just want to say a huge thank you for all of your time. It's been a really interesting session and some great reflections. As I said, this is a series, so we are going to be doing more of these where we unite policy and investment and have a look at a tool. If you like today's event and want to share your thoughts with others, please head over to LinkedIn and make sure you tag us into the conversation. As Vicky said, we will be putting up a print version of this on the DT Resource Hub, and we will be sharing the recording and the slides as well. So thank you so much. And as you can see from the screen, this is the ways that you can keep in contact with DT. And then on the other side is the QR code, in which if you scan it, you can sign up to the TIPC mailing list. So yes, a big thank you to everyone, and hope to see you again soon.